Welcome to Box Office Bob-ombs. If a movie is based on a video game, chances are it's going to blow. Across the aisle from me is a man I can only think to describe as podcast host to the film critic, Dylan Flynn.
And across the aisle from me, a man who has a soft spot for the unknown because they remind him of what he's going to be when he dies. Mr. Trevor Ickrath.
Dylan, once again, welcome back to the show. So good to sit down and talk to you about these video game movies again.
So nice to be hosting a Pokemon-themed podcast with my good pal.
Three weeks in a row. It's sure going to feel good talking about whatever we end up talking about next week.
Oh boy, yeah, just taking off the fucking training weights.
Yeah, I knew that this was a possibility when we started the show, because I had a vague memory of all these Pokemon movies coming out in pretty quick succession, but I had a fool's hope that maybe there would be one brief respite in the form of some other movie.
Yeah, maybe a little daylight would sneak its way in between one of these.
Yeah, no, we went 3 for 3. We really did it.
I will tell you, let me give you some information that will, on the surface, feel like a relief, but also secretly is like a harbinger.
Okay.
It's only going to happen one more time in this show that we do back-to-back sequels.
Okay. Just back-to-back or back-to-back-to-back again?
Because, that's all I'm saying. Back-to-back sequels, and you're just going to have to, every time, you never know.
Yeah.
It might come.
I could have done the two pretty easily, I think. It was this third one that really broke me. And I'll tell you, it kind of did break me.
Sick. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be exciting when we get into our discussion of Pokemon 3, the movie.
Psst, want to know a secret?
What are you doing here?
Well, I'm here to tell everyone that there's another Pokemon movie on the third Saturday of July.
Liar.
Easy. I'm not lying, it's true. And I'm so excited, I'm going to sing you the Pokemon movie song. 1, 2, 3, 4! Pokemon 3, Saturday at 4 and 3. Harry, thumbs up.
The most awkwardly titled one yet, I would say.
Now it's time to officially discuss the stylizing of these fucking titles.
So
we gotta
weird.
talk about it.
It was Pokemon the first movie, right?
Okay, Pokemon : the first movie.
It's a confident move, implying that there will be more.
Then Pokemon the movie 2000, no punctuation in sight. That's just a big run-on phrase.
This title has actually kind of grown on me in the week past because I realized not only did it come out around the year 2000,
right,
but it was the second Pokemon movie. So you get to keep that 2 in the title. You kind of kill two birds with one stone, you know?
But now we got Pokemon 3, the movie. So now the colon's back, but it's also moved to after the number.
It feels like some kind of weird, very intentional, stylistic choice that they must have thought was cool. Like that band Godspeed You! Black Emperor.
Yeah, that must have been the inspiration.
This is a real post-rock album title of a Pokemon movie title.
I think this situation continues on to the franchise, but guess what? We never have to talk about that again.
Because none of them reached the threshold for theatrical screenings that we use to gauge what is and what isn't worth talking about when it comes to these game adaptations.
Which we've never openly broadcast on the show. It's the official designation from the Nielsen Group, the same people who do the TV ratings. They say that in North America, 600 screens or more is a wide release. So that's what we go by. You need a wide North American release to be featured on Box Office Bob-ombs.
Yeah, and that's movie theater screens, not Game Boy screens, gamers.
Oh.
So maybe let go your joysticks there and save up your quarters.
Yeah, certainly stop touching your joystick while we tell you about this Pokemon children's movie. It was released by Warner Brothers on April 6, 2001, under the Kids WB label. April, back when we were still so innocent, the darkness had not yet come to this country later that year.
It's crazy that this was still pre-9/11 to me. I could have sworn that this was after.
I know, especially just the general tone. Well, we'll get into it, but it's based on the Pokemon franchise of games published by Nintendo. I guess you can say more specifically it's based on Gold and Silver. We're firmly Johtoing it up now.
Maybe even Crystal, if you want to include that one. But hey, it cost $16 million to produce, which is down from $30 million from the second one we talked about. And it earned $68.5 million internationally, which was down from $133.9 for Pokemon 2.
Yeah, so that means you're still in profit. They would have need to made 40 or more for profit, but those margins have certainly thinned. It's official, right? Pokemon Fever is done?
Yeah, it's just the diehards coming out these days just to get those exclusive cards I imagine they were still offering.
And that will kind of persist until Pokemon Go creates a whole,
Yeah, the second wave.
Yeah, shadow version kind of the whole situation again.
Yeah, almost what, 20 years later?
I know, crazy that it did it twice. This
Yeah.
opened on 2,675 screens, down from 2,751 for Pokemon 2. Still the third widest released video game movie on the show so far. So as of this moment in 2001, 1, 2, and 3 for the widest released video game movies all belong to Pokemon.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, just like thinking about what a real juggernaut this franchise was.
What else doesn't surprise me is that things happen in this movie. Maybe you can catch us up by giving us a little taste of this plot, Trevor.
A plague of crystals has overtaken the once peaceful town of Greenfield. There's no telling how far the blight could spread, so it's up to Ash Ketchum to face off against the noble beast, a flock of spooky letters, and the grieving heart of a troubled child.
Okay.
I'm glad that finally 3 movies later we actually found a way to work in some like familial trauma and grief into a Pokemon movie and not have it get cut out of the international version at the last minute.
Yeah, interesting that nobody was able to Edward Scissorhands that shit out this time, and it got stateside, didn't it?
So let's talk about our cast of characters. Given that this is the threequel, we can cut it a little short and just say that the voice actors for Ash, Pikachu, Misty, Brock is back this time in a speaking role.
Yay.
Jesse, James, Meowth, Tracy, Professor Oak, and Ash's mom all return.
Tracy does still worm his way into this thing. I guess he's Oak's little buddy now, huh?
He actually almost has like a bigger role in this movie than the last one, merely because somebody says something back to him when he has a line of dialogue one time.
Yeah, his existence is acknowledged in this film.
Yeah.
New to this movie, let's get to know some of these characters. Let's start right here with Molly Hale, a little girl who retreats into a dream world when her trauma becomes too much to bear, played by Amy Birnbaum, who played Melody back in the last Pokemon movie. And she also plays Molly at 3 different ages in the film, which I think is kind of a little bit of an impressive piece of voice acting.
Yeah, I mean, her range, wow. We've also got Spencer Hale, Molly's dad, a professor who disappears while researching an ancient Pokemon legend, played by Dan Green, who other children's anime watchers may recognize as the voice of Yugi Moto from Yu-Gi-Oh!
I know, the main Yu-Gi-Oh guy. That was after this, so this was like his foot in the door.
Yeah, I knew I recognized him from somewhere. I watched a shitload of Yu-Gi-Oh! When I was a little kid.
He also plays Dan Green Entei, a legendary dog who was wished into existence by Molly to act as her surrogate father. So he's kind of like her dad and her fake dad.
Yeah, I was very, I don't know if I would say underwhelmed when I learned that Entei in this movie was just kind of like a fake illusion.
You felt a certain way about it, huh?
Yeah, which is weird because I had no investment in this movie going in.
You know, we already talked about how she's back, but we should mention that Ash's mom kind of plays more of a pivotal role here. In the last one, she was just kind of wringing her hands, is Ash going to be okay?
Yeah.
In this one, she's, I guess, childhood friends with this guy, Spencer Hale, and when she finds out something's going on, she wants to see what's going on, and then she gets kind of caught up in all of the drama herself.
They only really touch on her history with that other character very, very briefly, but yeah, you do get the idea that there was something there, and that kind of draws her to the action with a little more purpose than she had in the last movie.
Yeah, Ash has to go rescue her after she gets kidnapped.
Yeah, and brainwashed.
Pretty crazy. You got Skylar also, Professor Hale's research partner who witnesses his disappearance, played by Ted Lewis. Skylar and Spencer, you think there's something going on there? I don't know.
Do you think there was something going on naming this character after the actress that played her? I'm talking about Lisa, a Pokemon trainer from the Johto region who hits it off with Ash and his friends, played by Lisa Ortiz.
And finally, we got the Unknown, a powerful and mischievous throng of Pokemon who can manifest dreams into reality.
I've always had issues with the Unknown, and we'll talk about them a little more later, I think.
But before we do, let's talk a little bit about the unknown quantity of the critical reception of this film.
Well, it's a known quantity because you have it right here in the notes, which I will read right now.
Good point.
On Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 20% critic score, up from 19% for Pokemon 2, and a 54% user score, which is down from 56% for Pokemon 1.
So we still follow this creeping trend of the fans like it less, the critics like it a little bit more.
Yeah, very strange. I would not, if you showed me all 3, I would not have pegged this one as the critical favorite.
I absolutely would have. I'm going to get in right now and tell you, out on a limb as I may be, I quite enjoyed this one.
Yeah, was it like the emotional heart of like the narrative around the little girl and stuff that really did it for you? I could see the critics kind of getting into that. Yeah.
I felt very involved with the melodrama of it all. Let's zoom in on these critics a little bit. What do they have to say back in the day?
Well, Neil Smith from BBC kind of agrees with you. He says the latest exploits from these Nintendo-inspired gremlins prove to be, if not exactly enjoyable, then at least halfway tolerable.
I mean, that's baby steps. I don't know.
Rotten Tomatoes user Was Up My Bee is a little more split on it, though. He says, in all caps, as per usual, it was okay. The story isn't that cool, but I like to see the unknowns.
Let's try that again. What did he call them?
Oh, sorry. The unquans.
The unquans.
To be fair, the spelling for these guys is fucked up. And whenever I see it in text, I automatically say unown.
You have to imagine that there's that the naming the unknowns UNOWN negatively impact the literacy of our generation.
So, just looking at some trivia about this movie,
Let's do it.
Sean Connery was offered the role of Spencer Hale / Entei, but he declined it.
Yeah, well, it seems like that's a thing that keeps happening, right? They're like, we should get a celebrity in this one.
And they're like, Pokemon? Get the fuck out of here.
Here's a guy I was thinking about a lot during this screening.
Yeah.
Imagining him fucking hunched over over his typewriter, muttering, taking tranquilizers, going fucking nuts.
Intermittently reciting pi to the 15th place.
Yeah, for sure. We're talking, of course, about Pokemon screenwriter Takeshi Shudo, who submitted a finished draft initially of a completely different script for the third Pokemon movie, which would involve a fossilized T-Rex.
That's wild.
Not a fucking Tyranitar or whatever.
Aerodactyl, get out of here. We're talking about Tyrannosaurus Rex, baby. We're going to Jurassic Park.
And then the scientists would resurrect it and it would go on a rampage across Johto. The Pokemon Company rejected this draft because they felt like introducing some real world animals into the world of Pokemon would be confusing for the brand.
It would be pretty confusing for the brand, although I would argue the fact that Pokemon are really the only animals in this world is also kind of confusing.
Yeah, but it is at least its own internally consistent logic. I feel like it really starts to break once you introduce outside elements into it,
It starts to break when you think about what these characters eat and exist on.
Let's talk more about the main character of this Pokemon series, Takeshi Shudo.
Right. So in the US dub, which we both watched, Molly's mother disappears before the events of the movie in a similar circumstance to her father.
Right.
Which is different from the Japanese version where Molly's mother is in the hospital for an unspecified illness.
Very My Neighbor Totoro.
Sure. Yeah, a little bit. That wasn't the case, though, in Shudo's original script. He originally intended for Molly's mom to have died in childbirth, which would have been a great detail to include in this Pokemon movie. He was most of the way done with the screenplay, but then he suffered from acute pancreatitis due to his alcoholism. And he had to be hospitalized, at which point the script was handed over to Hideki Sonata, who changed Molly's mother to be ill rather than deceased, and added a scene during the credits showing Molly and her mom reunited.
Right. They all kind of hug there at the big mansion at the end or whatever.
Sounds like a wholesome ending. You know who did not like that idea?
Probably Takeshi Shudo, I would imagine.
He had based the circumstances of Molly's life on his own childhood. His mother died in childbirth, and he was raised by his father.
Right.
So when he saw this change had been made, he felt personally betrayed, both by the Pokemon Company and Sonata, who he considered a friend. And that was kind of the last straw for him. He quit the franchise and never returned.
Yeah, he said that he could never watch this movie. He was so kind of wounded by the whole experience.
Yeah, and he died pretty soon afterwards. Is that right, or was it a while after that?
I think he's got about 8 years left of doing other projects before he kicks the bucket.
Okay.
So I need to know. I'm already checked out from the franchise by this point. But in 2001, does Trevor Ickreth give enough of a shit about Pokemon to go see this movie? What's the story?
I was pretty done with the franchise by this point. I do not remember going to see this movie in theaters. I don't even remember it coming out, really.
You didn't get your Entei card, your weekend one Entei card?
No, is that what they were giving out? An Entei card?
Yep.
I was never a big legendary dog guy.
I loved Gold and Silver. Those were definitely my jam, those games.
Yeah, I definitely had I was still enjoying the Pokemon video games by this point, definitely.
But you were no longer kind of a slave to the grander brand.
No, I had fallen out of the zeitgeist. In fact, I think by the point Ruby and Sapphire came out, which must have been a few years later, I was fully checked out and I didn't even play those games.
Right. Yeah. So weird that it just fell away from us like that, didn't it? I mean, I also have no memory of this movie coming out, so it must have made such little penetration culturally into like the world of the middle schooler.
Yeah, I mean, Pokemon was really just one of those things like from my childhood that I felt like I needed to actively reject in order to like grow up at this phase of my life.
You are off on your own Pokemon journey now to catch and conquer education and sex and puberty.
I think I was still playing Yu-Gi-Oh too by this point, but don't tell any of my classmates.
Tell me, though, what you put into the tier list. Now we're going to get into our formal tier list for Pokemon 3, the movie. I'm getting the sense that you were not as won over by this experience as I, so I'm glad that you're holding down the fort with the F tier this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to make an objective judgment call on where this movie sits in quality compared to the other two that we've watched. I feel like no matter which order we would have watched them in, I probably was always going to find like the last one the most interminable. For the F tier, I've picked something that I've already like complained about a little bit. The Unknown.
Right.
I've never liked these guys. Even as a kid playing the second gen Pokemon games for the first time, they felt like a really lazily designed way to just stuff more content into the game. It's like, not only do we have like a new Pokemon, but there are like 26 different variations of them and you can catch them all and there's like a side quest associated with it or whatever.
Right.
I've never even went down that rabbit hole. Just I couldn't get into it. But they also kind of frustrated me in this movie just because like I felt like there was like a real inconsistent way to the way they worked, you know?
Right, the rules are a little bit hazy.
Molly wishes for her dad, who they still very much have alive, just floating in their own like liminal Poke dimension.
Yeah.
When I first saw the movie, I thought like that was it for him. He was gone, you know? This girl was really orphaned. It's revealed at the end of the movie that he's just hanging out there and he like pops back into reality and everything's fine.
Right.
So she wishes for her dad. Instead of giving her dad, how about this Pokemon that talks like your dad?
Yeah, well, she kind of establishes earlier that she has like a soft spot for this Entei. So I guess they set it up in the script.
I know that we're working on a kind of like monkey's paw logic where like her wishes are being like subconsciously expressed in like kind of fucked up ways. But then like we get a wish for like her mother to be back in the picture and they just kind of go grab some other woman and brainwash her to act like her mom.
Right.
Why not like have another Pokemon that's like serving that role, you know?
Well, here's where I think that that other guy who polished the script after Shudo had his pancreatitis kind of fucked up, because I think if the mom is dead, it makes more sense or at least evaporated into another dimension. It makes more sense for Entei to just be like, oh, you want a mom like that? I'll go get that mom then. But if she's just sick in a hospital, why isn't this little girl just like wishing for her mom to be there with her? I don't get it.
A lot of questions. Usually I don't even care about like stuff like that, like plot contrivances, but I don't know. I went in ready to be kind of rubbed the wrong way, and I guess this did do that to me. So yeah, the Unknown are going in the F tier.
Then I'll take it up with the D tier. I'm going to put,
Okay.
you know what? This has never happened before. I feel a little guilty with my D tier pick this week.
All right.
I'm putting Team Rocket into the D tier.
Yeah.
I have goodwill for these fucking goofballs.
I always kind of want them to be the best part of the movie.
And maybe it's just nostalgia goggles, you know, but there's something about the costumes, the voices. But I think this movie felt like it had a specific story to tell, a legitimate story to tell. When the movie gets dark, I think Ash and Misty and Brock as your main three can kind of act as players in that melodrama and blend and not feel so out of place, you know?
Yeah.
But just as written, there's no way to make Jesse and James and Meowth not feel like they're in a totally different movie from everybody else. All they can do is crack wise and be cartoon characters. I think overall, conceptually, the biggest weakness to Pokemon 3 is that it has to carry so much water for the Pokemon anime, because that show, I think, is a little bit smaller and a little bit simpler than kind of the tone and the goals of this story that this movie's trying to tell.
Yeah.
And I think Team Rocket emblematizes that tension. You know, they're just baggage that the movie is carrying. So, sorry guys, you're my buddies, but Jesse and James and Meowth, you're going into the D tier this week.
It is a little extra disappointing because you feel like if the movie had somehow found a way to incorporate Team Rocket into like the emotional narrative in a way that they could actually contribute to it, like that would have been pretty cool to see happen.
Yeah, I agree. What's going in the C tier this week?
It's interesting that you put Team Rocket in the D tier because I agree that this movie does really underserve them. I think there are other characters who like get far better treatment than they have gotten in some of the previous movies. I'm talking about Brock and Misty.
Yeah.
In the C tier, I've put this movie's decision to pull in Brock and Misty for some Pokemon battles.
The battles in general are much more involved here, in my opinion.
Yeah, they're much more robust. You know, after the last movie kind of relegated Misty to her subplot about whether or not she was Ash's girlfriend and completely ignored Tracy, it felt like a good move to let like the supporting cast, at least like the more direct members of it, actually engage in some Pokemon battles, especially ones that are like really integral to the plot. And like you were saying, like it also kind of provides like an excuse to get some more Pokemon battles into the story. And for my money, those are kind of still the most entertaining things about these movies.
I would argue that these are the only Pokemon battles we've had in these movies that really felt like they had like a beginning, a middle, and an end, and didn't just feel like montage pieces of Pokemon action.
Yeah, we haven't really had any actual like a trainer on trainer Pokemon battle from start to finish since the opening credit sequence in the Mewtwo movie where Ash fights that trainer with the Donphin.
Yeah, and there's another one in the opening credit sequence of this movie between Ash and Lisa that I also think is like quite well staged and very elaborate.
Yeah, the Pokemon battles are pretty strong. I really appreciate that Brock and Misty actually get to do some of them. I really think this was an improvement, so that's going in the C tier for me.
I've got the B tier.
Cool.
This hasn't happened yet on the show, and I'm excited that it's finally happened.
All right, what is it?
I put into the B tier The Unknown.
Oh boy, you were into these guys.
Okay, well, first of all, B tier, so I do have my issues. First of all, bad Pokemon. It starts the whole unnecessary glut in those games of like,
yeah,
hey, look, there's all these variants of this one, which is super, super dumb.
Yeah.
Very weak design concept, like you said. I also think that the decision to depict these guys as CGI is a bad one. I kept thinking like, this shot would actually look cool if these guys were hand animated.
So what gets them into the B tier?
I kind of enjoyed what they brought to the table in terms of the vibe of them being like an eldritch horror species, you know, like you fucked with some kind of forbidden knowledge and now you've brought something into our realm that does not belong here. Specifically, what they really reminded me of were the Clockwork Elves. Are you familiar with Clockwork Elves?
A little bit, yeah. I've read some stuff online about the Clockwork Elves.
That's right. There's a powerful psychedelic called DMT. It basically causes ego death. You just go into a fucking completely different dimension of reality when you take it.
Yeah.
And bizarrely, a significant number of people who take this drug report very similar, even identical hallucinations involving this race of like little elf-like creatures called the Clockwork Elves. We're not talking about Pokemon. We're talking about things that high intensity trippers really believe are happening to them.
I'm already hoping that, like, you know, when you wind up putting together the entertaining, amusing little bumper that you always cut together for these episodes, that you're able to find somebody on like the Joe Rogan podcast.
Oh yeah,
explaining the Clockwork Elves to him, because I'm sure that's happened. I hope you're able to just like cut in somebody saying like unknown wherever that person says Clockwork Elves.
I'm telling you, Joe, this is a real deal.
I believe you.
It's people who are psychically, genetically available to interface with Pokemon. There are bad things that look like elves that have horns when they show you who they really are, and you're in the meetings with frickin' aliens. Pokemon is the main group. It's no good when you get there.
Who's organizing all this?
Nintendo.
So the Clockwork Elves are usually depicted as being not necessarily malicious, but they're like very playful and very irreverent, and because their powers are kind of frightening and beyond human comprehension, when they start fucking with you, it's dangerous. So like it's like if you encounter one of them, you should try to get away. Also, weirdly, the lore of the Clockwork Elves has kind of made it into like far-right conspiracy theories about like interdimensional demonic presences in the Democratic Party, but I guess that's a bit of a digression that I can't get into here on this Pokemon podcast. However, the Unknown really remind me of them. You know, they come into our world because we played with their little puzzle. It's kind of like the Cenobites in Hellraiser. But whenever we see them, they're always just kind of like singing and dancing together. You know, it's like the most unknowable terror are the ones that are beyond the human dimension that are threatening us, not because they are evil, but because they're so incompatible with our reality.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, fuck it. Unknown, you're going into the B tier for me because I think that's kind of wacky.
Yeah, that's crazy. Jamie, could we get a video of the unknown up on the monitors? Can we check that out? That's good. I think you made a sufficient argument for them. I understand really enjoying that element.
You got the A tier. I'm ready to hear you say something just like sweepingly positive about this film, just to mend my broken heart that you're not here in the Pokemon 3 the movie fan club with me.
I don't know, man. I really had a hard time locking in here and just finding anything about this movie to enjoy. I was able to appreciate some things about it for sure, like the emotional stakes and things like that, but like nothing really got me out of my seat to like lean forward. So I tried to think about like if I hadn't gotten out of Pokemon when I did and I was still like really into it when this hit the theaters and I went to go see it in the theaters, what really would have like sparked joy in me?
Totally.
Based on that, for the A tier, I've selected the Charizard versus Entei fight.
Oh, I thought maybe Ash's Charizard would make it here.
It's cool that he just he swoops in out of nowhere. I know they parted ways in the anime by this point. I remember that happening. You know, Charizard and Ash always did have a very rocky relationship in that show. So it's nice to see them working together here. And we've already talked about like how this movie just has like a higher class of Pokemon battle to offer in general. And I think that this fight between Charizard and Entei does like live up to the best fights we've seen in the other two movies so far. It was cool to see like an iconic Pokemon like Charizard take to the skies and just go one-on-one with another very powerful Pokemon.
Let me tell you what I liked about Ash's Charizard and how he gets implemented in this is that you get that little shot of Ash's Charizard living among the dragons and the dragon trainers.
Yeah.
Like near the beginning of Act 2, like watching on the news, and then he shows up at Act 3 at the moment he's most needed. First time Shudo has pulled off a fucking legitimate screenplay move of loading a fucking Chekhov's gun and then using it.
Nice.
We finally have some screenwriting happening in these movies.
Nothing like that has really ever happened in any of these movies, so it was nice to see something like that go on, for sure. It felt like I was watching an actual movie, maybe.
And it is cool that he's there. I mean, that relationship between Ash and that Charizard was always a complex, interesting relationship.
It's cool that Charizard can also, you know, watch and understand things that he sees on TV.
Yeah, totally. I wonder if in this modern day, if he would just get radicalized on YouTube.
Probably, yeah. Do you think he'd listen to this podcast? Do you think Charizard would listen to this podcast on YouTube?
He'd be like, these guys are boring. Oh, Clockwork Elves? Now they're talking about my shit.
All right, so you've kept me in suspense this entire episode. What's going to be in the S tier for Pokemon 3, the movie?
It's kind of a blanket thing to put into the tier list, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm putting just the emotionally harrowing conundrum at the center of the conflict of this film into the S tier.
Yeah.
The most shocking thing about my screening of this movie was just how gravely concerned I was feeling for some of these characters and for their outcomes. You know, I don't really care how many legendary birds you throw at me and how you tell me they're going to blow up the world. Like, at no point am I going to go, oh, fuck. Is Ash going to be able to stop these fucking birds from blowing the world up? Like, that's never going to cross my mind.
I hope Articuno is okay.
This time, though, the stakes were so much more tethered to human and recognizable problems. Yes, something powerful and destructive is like threatening the world or whatever, but in order to overcome that threat, you don't have to just like beat a Pokemon. What you have to do is you have to force a 5-year-old girl to like accept and process orphanhood.
Yeah.
You know, you have to like break through her psychic defenses and force this tiny child to like to submit to the idea that she's alone in the world. And there's something that I found like really compelling about that being at the center of all of this.
Yeah, it's a very tragic story because, like, you know, for the duration of it, like, as far as you know, like, even the good ending still, like, has this, like, girl as an orphan.
Totally. It's a really tough thing to overcome and something that, like, Ash is going to need to step up emotionally to do. But, like, before the unknown even get involved, I think Molly's life as established is already a pretty melancholic existence for her. Like, they depict her and her dad as having, like, a very loving rapport together, but, like, it's pretty clear that this little girl spends most of her time alone in this giant mansion while her dad is out doing field research and her mom is gone.
Yeah, if my mother was dead and I was a little girl and I found out that the Pokemon my dad was obsessed with finding was the unknown, I would be so fucking pissed.
You would grow up just hating his guts.
Yeah.
So, you know, she's a lonely kid. She's in a huge mansion being raised by the help. She's soaking up what love and support she can from her dad whenever he's around. And then it's no wonder that when she gets the news that he's gone, it just completely psychologically breaks her. So you've got this very empathetic villain figure. The tension there is that Ash is going to have to fix this situation in a way that doesn't fix her circumstances. And you mentioned that fight between Ash's Charizard and Entei, which I think on a kinetic level is playing out in a pretty good, loud, explosive third act skirmish. But what struck me about that sequence was how we kept cutting back to Molly, her face, watching this battle, processing, her eyes kind of trembling. And it's clear to me that the real battle is happening inside of that little still forming mind. Because she knows that the dream that she is clinging to, it's safety, but it's also causing harm to people, and she knows that's wrong, but it means that she has to be brave enough to step away from that and say, I'm alone in the world. I just think it's a really great quandary to set a drama around. I'm putting it in the S tier. I would even say that take Pokemon out of this fucking movie. Get rid of Ash, get rid of Pikachu, make Entei a more generic, godlike...
Yeah, some kind of fairy tale creature.
Miyazaki beast or whatever.
Yeah.
And keep the bones of this plot, and you probably have an underrated anime that gets brought up in fucking Reddit and 4chan threads,
Yeah, it kind of is dealing almost, I would say, with the same issues as the Super Mario Bros. Movie.
Totally.
Where it feels like a pretty good sci-fi family adventure that is not really benefiting from having to carry the weight of this franchise that it's being adapted from.
I agree. I think that the issue here is that there is a sort of a schizophrenic quality to the identity of the film.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
I do think that although obviously they bring back Molly's dad at the end, I think the way that they did that was fairly tasteful. They did give Ash a chance to talk to her. There's a really good line of dialogue where after she's afraid to leave this behind, he says, listen,
come with us, Molly. On the outside, the battles might be hard,
But the friends are real.
and I think that's a really nice line of dialogue.
Yeah, and I think you do have a good point that the father coming back into the picture does not really play any role in the action resolving itself or the problem resolving itself. It's just kind of a bonus at the end. It would feel like it was undercutting things a little more if it had happened at a more integral part of the movie. But yeah, since it's just kind of a credits thing, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't know, I got very stirred up by it in a way that I was surprised and pleasantly surprised too, because I was also prepared to go into this and to be fucking hell, how am I watching another one of these things? But I was hey, I'm watching another one of these things and there's stuff that I'm really responding to.
Yeah, I could definitely see it being a life raft. It is really the thing to be kind of excised out of this movie and enjoyed for sure.
Let's excise and potentially enjoy or feel some sort of way about our categories of ratings. We borrow the system as used by the 90s version of the GamePro magazine scoring system, broken down into categories, and the first one is graphics. Trevor, why don't you start us off?
I found it very hard to find any new insight into how this movie looked versus the way the other ones looked.
Very similar.
Very similar. Like you said earlier, I think there were some things that were rendered in CGI that did not really benefit from that treatment. I think we were still kind of figuring out good ways to combine CGI and more traditional animation at this point. And this movie is just kind of a relic of that. But yeah, the visuals in general, probably better than the previous two movies, but there was nothing that I particularly enjoyed looking at design-wise. So I'm going to go down to a 3 on this one.
Look, I've always been lower than you in the graphics so far. I'm not impressed by this 90s anime look.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say this movie's come up in terms of its production values in any significant way. It still looks kind of par for the course. Conceptually, I do think the visual idea here are a little bit more interesting than in past times. I think some of these dreamscapes that Molly is imagining into existence are interesting looking, the kind of glass steps up in the sort of surreal looking pink sunrise area, kind of interesting looking. I also, again, think that the Pokemon battles have been staged in a much more dynamic and considered way. So I am going to meet you in the middle. I'm impressed. You're disappointed enough to be at a 3.0. I'm impressed enough to be at a 3.0. I'm giving it a 3.0 for graphics.
Yeah, I go forward, you go backwards, somewhere we will meet, or whatever they say.
That's how it goes, right?
Let's talk about the sound. Thankfully, I didn't think this movie had anything as sonically offensive as the Zapdos voice acting from the last movie.
Yeah, I think Molly in general, when she does that crazy fucking thing when she's like, I'm too young to be a Pokemon trainer, and Entei's like, you just have to believe you're old enough, and then she ages up suddenly into an adult. Kind of a striking moment.
Yeah.
And I do think that the voice acting there is kind of good.
I think the voice acting was probably better than it's been in the other two movies, but there wasn't too much other than that to remark on for me. The song that played during the credit sequence was a little worse than the one that played in the first two movies, I think.
Oh my God, yeah, that opening song, there's a fucking lyric. The one where he's like, it's a whole new world with a brand new attitude, but you still gotta catch them all.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
So I'm going to go to I can't remember if I'm going down or if I'm just sticking at a 1.5 here.
I think the score is also really shitty here. I thought the score in Pokemon the Movie 2000 was a real high point.
Yeah, you did like that one.
It's a step down. There's some very bad synth strings and shit. And yeah, I'm not blown away enough by any of the voice acting to come up too high. I'm going to match you, 1.5.
Cool. Let's talk about Control, which we use to determine how much the movie we're watching feels like a video game.
Yeah, I don't think so that much here. I mean, it feels, again, more like kind of a hidden gem anime to me, a spooky anime. I guess those more full-featured, more elaborate Pokemon battles kind of register. So maybe a little bit more video gamey than the first one. I don't know. I can't give it too high, though. 2.0.
I'm going to be a little more generous. I do think the fact that there is just kind of like more Pokemon battling per square footage here does make it feel a little bit more like a Pokemon game. Mm-hmm. In particular, this whole thing just feels like events that would play out when you go to like a village in one of the games. You know, like there's always kind of one major thing going on at a town that you stop in. They frequently require you to like climb up some kind of vertical structure battling as you go, which happens here.
Yeah.
That's kind of a classic video game thing, I think.
Definitely, you're right.
I'm going to go with a 3 on this one.
The fun factor, I was very involved, which I guess is adjacent to having fun. I wasn't laughing at any of these gags. I especially thought it was annoying how so many of the Team Rocket gags were like fourth wall breakers about like, oh, we're in another movie. It's cool to be in a movie.
Yeah.
I thought that stuff was doing absolutely nothing for me.
They do have a fourth wall breaking joke where they specifically mention how they don't have anything to do in this one,
which I guess is at the very least observant.
Yeah, self-aware.
Some of the dream reality bending stuff read to me as kind of rad, which is also fun adjacent. Like, you know, when the world kind of floods with water and they realize they can breathe underwater, or like the fact that Molly could like split her consciousness into two places at once. Like that shit was kind of mind bendy. Yeah, I don't know. 2.0, that sound fair? 2.0.
Yeah, I don't think this movie is very fun at all. If by like nothing else, just by virtue of being about like, you know, a little girl who's lost her parents and then gets trapped inside of like a reality distortion field.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would just say by nature, it's a pretty sad movie. Team Rocket do get their jokes in.
But it's not really doing much.
Yeah, the concept just kind of casts like a shadow over the whole thing for me.
Yeah.
And since this movie really did very little to entertain me personally, I'm going to go all the way down to a 1 on this.
I can feel it.
But again, it's not really going for fun, so.
No, yeah, Shudo's goals were different. He wanted to talk about his own childhood trauma in a Pokemon movie.
Yeah.
I'm going to use Pikachu to work some shit out, guys. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the challenge, how hard it was to sit through. I'll go first. I think it's pretty obvious where I'm sitting. I was very involved. I cared about the drama. It was short and sweet. I had no challenge whatsoever. Maybe I will say, after that Entei Charizard fight resolves and Molly kind of has her change of heart and says, no more fighting, I'm ready to accept reality again. The fact that you get that extra fight between Entei and the Unknown, that is, to me, a lot less emotionally involving than all of the other third act stuff. So maybe there...
I almost put that in my F tier, to be honest. That was a huge problem for me. And something we haven't said throughout this episode is that this is the shortest one of these movies. It's
very brisk.
Like 117 minutes or something. Like you could finish it. You could fit it on like an audio CD. You could listen to this movie.
It's true.
But those like last 5 minutes, that feels like 20 minutes. It was a real issue for me.
Yeah, what are we doing? I kind of feel like the Unknown should have just gone away as soon as she was like, I reject it. Still, I'm going to put this right into beginner for challenge. I did not have a hard time. I was much more involved than I was in the other Pokemon movies, and maybe it's benefiting to me from the comparison, but beginner's where I landed.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember what I did for the last one. I think I went all the way up to advanced
for 2000. Yeah.
I do think that just the story in this one makes it feel like it would go down a little easier than just kind of watching four legendary birds go at it for 90 minutes. So I don't think I'm going to go as high up on this as I did last time. I think intermediate.
Seems fair.
Like I said, my judgment is a little clouded just because it's hard to remain impartial at the end of like a trilogy.
Yeah, it's sort of like if somebody's running a brutal train on you and then third guy in makes tender, gentle love to you. I don't know if it's going to register.
Yeah. So I'll stick with intermediate, but it was a little tougher for me to get through personally just because of where it fell.
I hear you. You didn't need to watch all three of these in a row, and I'll tell you, unless you're a fucking like YouTube essayist, I don't see why you ever would.
Yeah, don't do it. What you should, though, is listen to how Dillon's tale of returning to this game on Game Boy finally resolved.
That's right. I beat Pokemon Blue just hours before the recording today. You know, I'll just tell you real quick that the Elite Four kind of went pretty swimmingly until I got to the final battle against Trevor.
Yeah.
When Dillon and Trevor faced off, I was pretty underleveled, and we got to his Alakazam, and he just started one-hit psychicking everybody. But the good news is that you only have 5 casts of Psychic. So he killed my 5 guys with 5 Psychics in a row, and then I saved the Blastoise Toad for last, and he was able to whittle him down with like some Dig and some Surf and shit. And we made it out the other end. All of my Pokemon are now in the Hall of Fame. But what I'm more excited to tell you about is that my daughter, 6-year-old daughter, Ramona, was watching over my shoulder. And once I rolled credit, she's like, I want to play.
Wow.
Can you start me a file? I want to play. So I booted up Pokemon Red on my little Anbernic fake Game Boy from China. And she played for the next like 2 hours. She picked a Charmander. She caught a Pidgey. She caught a Weedle. She caught a Kakuna. She's getting really into it. Her Charmander has learned Ember. She's like really figuring it out, and I'm very excited to see her transported by this fucking, I don't even want to do the math, 70-year-old game, I'm going to say.
That's pretty crazy. That's like her first real video game, right?
I mean, she plays Roblox and Minecraft because she's a fucking Gen Alpha kid.
Yeah.
But, you know, this is what I would call a real video game.
Well, that's pretty cool. You know, heartwarming end to that saga.
Yeah, my little daughter won't have the same generational trauma as little Molly did, hopefully. I don't know.
Yeah, until you get too deep into the Clockwork Elves and they abduct you into their dimension and restore you to her in the form of whatever is in fucking Roblox or whatever.
Yep. So this is the third time you've had to pitch me a new Pokemon game in the final segment of the show where Trevor tells us what the video game of this movie would be had it not been a video game before the movie, but was then later adapted into a video game after the movie. What do you do? What do you got for me this week?
Yeah, this one was really easy, dude. This is like some kind of, I think like tile-based word game that gets released for like iOS or something.
Hell yeah, Pokemon Picross or whatever.
Yeah, Pokemon, the mystery of the unknown. Or you know what? How about this? Bear with me here. It's been established that all the unknown variants kind of look like different letters, right?
That's right.
So if we get like a grid, right, of just like all these letters up here, and it's almost like a word search, but every letter in the word search is used to form an actual word, and they're all themed, so you got to find all of them. And you can not only go like, you know, up, down, across, but you could also go backwards and diagonal, any which way to make all these words. And hey, maybe we could even like throw in the actual theme as one of the words, although it would probably be so big it would have to go from one end of the board to the other. But that could be like a cool feature that you got to find in every level.
Yeah, I can't wait to play it.
Check the Apple App Store soon, because I think they're churning that out soon.
Thank God. Another SKU from the Pokemon Company coming soon to the App Store.
Hey, speaking about something that's coming soon to theaters near us, why don't you tell me what the next movie that we're going to be reviewing on this program is? Because I know it's not going to be a Pokemon movie.
Yeah, there's nothing I could tell you right now that would fill you with any kind of dread. Whatever I have behind this curtain is a relief for you.
I'm on top of the world.
We're in April 2001. We don't have to travel far. We're only moving ahead 2 months to June of 2001. Trevor, how would you like to watch a huge blockbuster film featuring a huge movie star.
That kind of sounds like what the movies are all about. Let me get my popcorn.
All right, then put down that Pokeball and pull out your dual-wielded pistols because it's time for us to watch Lara Croft, Tomb Raider.
Cool. I've been waiting to get to this one a little bit. I remember this coming out. I don't think I saw it in theaters, but of course I am familiar with the Tomb Raider IP as a red-blooded American male.
Yeah, I think I totally missed this movie too. I'm not sure why I never saw this movie, but I'm also excited to finally have an excuse.
Well, we'll talk about it next week, but till then, I've been Trevor Ickrath.
And I've been Dillon, and until next time, so long, Gay Bowser.
This has been a production of
The Lighthouse Keepers Company.
Culture illuminated.